Since this educational video is intended for pastors, I'm not going to dumb down this presentation. Anyone who knows what a concordance is and can use the word pericope correctly in a sentence can understand some complexities of thought around experience that people who are deaf have. Did you notice Dr. Cooper's reference in this video to a conference in Milan, Italy in 1880, at which an international group of hearing teachers of the deaf literally passed a resolution saying that the best way to teach children who are deaf was to ban them from using sign language? Did you notice that? It's very important. This moment in deaf history is devastating. It's like an atomic bomb going off in the deaf world. Deaf author and Gallaudet professor Melvia Noland refers to the era following this Milan meeting as their dark ages. Understanding this moment and what follows is a crucial key to understanding the chasm that exists to this day between two opposing beliefs about the best way for people who are deaf to navigate the world around them. Maybe you've been wondering what gave me the idea to do this educational video for hearing clergy. Wyatt C. Hall is a researcher at the University of Rochester. He is deaf himself, and it was an article by him that planted the seed in my head. The article is entitled, "What You Don't Know Can Hurt You: The Risk of Language Deprivation by Impairing Sign Language Development in Deaf Children." The paragraph in this article that grabbed my heart was this: medical and educational advice is frequently rooted in a framework of viewing deaf children as defective hearing people, an approach that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In fact, medical school education does not address language development for deaf and hard-of-hearing children, which can lead to flawed medical advice. Additionally, parents often rely on community sources, for example, teachers, ministers, and other community members, that are not knowledgeable about language, cognitive, and brain development of deaf children. Ouch! Convicted. Until I met Carl and began to study this subject, I was totally unaware of the damage that I could have done if presented with a certain set of circumstances as a pastor. That set of circumstances would have been hearing parents in my church who had given birth to a child who was deaf or profoundly hard of hearing, coming to me for advice. Now, having studied this subject in depth, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, back then, I would have done the wrong thing. I'm very glad that God never put me in that position. But then I got to thinking about all the hearing pastors who, like me, could do the wrong thing without intending to. So that's what gave birth to this video, and to this project as well. If you don't understand what language deprivation is and what I'm talking about, or if you're confused at this point, that's not a surprise to me. If you're feeling that way, I hope by the end of this video that you will feel like a door to a new world has been opened for you. Decisions for a newborn deaf or hard of hearing child that will affect them for their entire life is typically made by hearing doctors, hearing parents, hearing teachers, hearing audiologists, and yes, even hearing pastors. And those life-diverting decisions are supported and influenced by a corporate mindset on consumer products like cochlear implants and hearing aids. We, as hearing pastors, need to understand how these decisions are being made, what our prejudices are as hearing people, what societal pressures may be affecting us, and the devastation that we can cause if we get this crucial direction in a baby's life wrong. I need to add a caveat here. Obviously, no pastor should ever be giving people medical advice. I hope that's obvious, but I need to say it for the record. However, if hearing parents of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing come to a pastor, it is important how the pastor reacts. The issues those parents are dealing with are not just medical. They are also emotional and spiritual. What we as their trusted pastors do, how we react, what we can say can have a significant impact on them, on their attitude, and on the decisions that they make. We can and we should pray with parents, but what we say in our prayers can send parents in a helpful direction or in an unhealthy one. We can and should put such parents in contact with resources and professionals if they need that. But what resources and how educated those professionals are and how they view deafness and language development, again, can change that child's life forever. We shouldn't give the advice ourselves, but we can be models of and conduits of healthy attitudes. We can also introduce parents to information that they might not get elsewhere. And we can give emotional and spiritual support to parents if they find themselves bucking a system that tries to force them down a path that their research and their intuition tells them might be detrimental to their child. If you are not yet familiar with the term language deprivation, here is the definition provided by deaf researcher Wyatt C. Hall. Language deprivation occurs due to a chronic lack of full access to a natural language during the critical period of language acquisition when there is an elevated neurological sensitivity for language development, approximately the first 5 years of a child's life. Although there are still those who disagree, academic research over the past several decades has overwhelmingly proven that American Sign Language is a language, complete with vocabulary, tenses, grammar, syntax, and so on. Scientific research has furthermore proven that infants and preschoolers who are not exposed to fluent language, either by sound or sight or a combination of both, will suffer from one level or another of this totally preventable but permanent limitation on their lives. I can't be any clearer than that. Please now watch this video created by the Niall DeMarco Foundation as an introduction to the terms language deprivation and language acquisition. And by the way, you'll need to know what this sign is. It's the sign for milk. you'll be watching a video of a lecture by Wyatt C. Hall, in which you'll see a slide that has at one end of the spectrum the terms oral/CI in capital letters, and at the other end you'll see the words native and then ASL in capital letters. Now, oral refers to the oral-only approach to teaching deaf and profoundly hard of hearing children. Using the oral method, a child is not allowed to learn or use sign language. And capital C, capital I refers to cochlear implants, which I'll share more about in a little bit. So oral/CI thinking stems from the concern of hearing parents, teachers, and medical professionals that children who are deaf or profoundly hard of hearing are going to have to navigate a hearing world, and so must learn to use whatever technology exists to boost their ability to hear, including hearing aids and cochlear implants, and furthermore that they must learn to lip read and write English. Now, this is an understandable concern. The problem is that this legitimate concern about a deaf child's ability to navigate in a hearing world has evolved into the erroneous belief that sign language somehow interferes with a deaf child's ability or willingness to speak, or their ability or willingness to use hearing assisting technology, or to learn to lip read. I should note here, no one thinks teaching hearing babies sign language interferes with their development. We think that's cute and wonderful. It's a popular thing to do these days. It's only deaf children who have their hands tied behind their backs, so to speak. Cochlear implants are a relatively new technology that some people are not familiar with. According to the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, cochlear implants bypass damaged portions of the ear and directly stimulate the auditory nerve. Signals generated by the implant are sent by way of the auditory nerve to the brain, which recognizes the signals as sound. Hearing through a cochlear implant is different from normal hearing and takes time to learn or relearn. However, cochlear implants allow many people to recognize warning signals, understand other sounds in the environment, and to understand speech in person or over the telephone. Many older people who have lost their hearing due to certain types of ear damage over time are opting now for cochlear implants.
Hearing works by having tiny vibrations of the eardrum transferred to the cochlea. Those vibrations then move these tiny little hair cells, which then transfer the vibrational energy into electrical impulses, which then stimulate the nerves of hearing that go to the brain.
There's a nerve that goes from the hearing organ, the cochlea, to the brainstem. And on the hearing organ side, the cochlea, there are these little projections. We call them hair cells. When someone has hearing loss, these little hair cells get sick and kind of die. But the nerve itself is still completely functional. It just can't receive the signal.
A cochlear implant is a device that we can use to restore hearing. It's got two parts. One part is implanted into the inner ear, and then an outer part, which communicates with the inner part, takes sound and transfers it into electrical impulses. It allows us to bypass the damaged inner ear and stimulate the nerve to recreate hearing.
So a cochlear implant, in effect, is just a way to directly stimulate the cochlear nerve. So you're bypassing these hair cells and this special sensory organ of the cochlea and directly stimulating the nerve.
So by putting enough electrodes into the cochlea, we can recreate different pitches, because each pitch in the cochlea is coded by a different location.
And you've given them back something that they've been deeply missing. I mean, for years, every day, every minute of every day, they know they're missing it. it's just wonderful to see people in post-op who are hearing again. And, you walk in the room and their face lights up with a smile. It's hard not to love what you do.
For those watching this video with good hearing, you need to understand that hearing through hearing aids is not perfect, as many people who use them have told me. And hearing through cochlear implants is quite different and not nearly as good as some might want you to think. Listen now to this attempt to replicate for hearing people what sound is like through a cochlear implant.
We were allowed to use number 2 pencils. I was tired of running in the sprinkler. He wanted to stay up past midnight. He checked out 3 books from the school library.
I have listened to this simulation several times now. The first time, I couldn't understand it at all. The second time, I began to pick up some of the words. By the third and fourth times, I could understand what was being said if I really focused. You might want to try this experiment yourself. I think I was filling in some of the gaps the way our brains tend to do. Our brains are amazing gifts from God. I wear contact lenses that work by monovision. My right eye, the lens there, is calibrated to make far away things be clear, but things up close are fuzzy. My left eye's lens is calibrated for close-up things like this text here, but distance things are fuzzy. And my brain switches its attention to the correct eye instantly as I look up at a distance or look down at a text or a computer like I'm doing now. I'm not even aware of it unless I close one eye. I'm sure it's similar with cochlear implants. Our brains are selective and do what they have to do to make use of our senses, to give us the best information possible. Though imperfect, cochlear implants are helping many people gain or regain some hearing.